What if I told you that using cardboard in the garden is a terrible idea? It doesn't kill weeds effectively, it doesn't feed the soil, and it does absolutely nothing to improve your soil health. After years of trial and error, I've developed a system that not only eliminates weeds, but builds living, thriving soil without a single piece of cardboard. My method uses cover crops as a natural sheet mulch, with roots still in the ground, creating a weed-free garden while boosting biodiversity, improving soil structure and drainage, while scavenging for nutrients, bringing them to the soil surface, locking them in, and making them plant available for healthier plants and bigger harvests with no fertilizer. Cardboard just smothers the ground, but cover crops feed the soil. Their roots break up compaction, support soil microbes, and add organic matter where it matters the most, below the soil surface. In this video, I'll show you exactly how to build the ultimate no-dig garden using cover crops as a sheet mulch, and why cardboard belongs in your recycling bin and not in your garden. Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to Chef's Harvest Farm. If you're new here, I'm Chef Mikey. I'm a former executive chef turned urban farmer, and I turned my backyard gardening hobby into a thriving no-till farm where I grow food sustainably for local chefs and restaurants here in Knoxville, Tennessee. Over the years, I've tested just about every gardening method out there, made mistakes, fought the weeds, and figured out what actually worked. Over the past 8 years, I've developed a cover crop system that improves crop health, eliminates weeds, and builds healthier soil without chemicals or cardboard. But it didn't start this way. When I first began gardening in my backyard, the soil was nothing more than hard compacted clay, like concrete. That's why I started with typical raised beds, thinking nothing would grow in my native soil. But after years of trial and error, I developed a system that transformed this into healthy living soil, and I'm confident it can improve almost any soil, no matter how bad it is. So, how does it work? It all starts with one simple shift. Stop thinking about how to feed your plants and start thinking about how to feed the soil. I farm using nature as the model. In a forest, nobody's fertilizing the trees, yet they thrive. Leaves fall, creating a natural mulch. The soil's never exposed, which is why you never see erosion. Animals add nutrients, plants break down, and nothing is ever removed. It's a self-sustaining system. You never see an entire forest wiped out by pests because there's balance where predators and prey exist in harmony. In contrast, when we only grow vegetables, we create a buffet for pests with nothing to keep them in check. That's why I use multi-species cover crops. They don't just improve the soil, they create an ecosystem underground and above. More plant diversity means more microbial diversity, healthier soil, fewer pests, and stronger crops with higher yields. It's nature's way of keeping things balanced, and it works. I mimic this process using cover crops and compost. The result, healthy living soil that grows thriving crops without synthetic fertilizers, constant maintenance, or fighting against nature. Step 1 is preparing your garden plot. And this is where most people get it wrong. Why? Because they're impatient. The key here is letting time do the work. This isn't the fastest way to build a garden, but in my opinion, it's the most effective. I start by laying down a silage tarp, and not any tarp. It has to be either a silage tarp or greenhouse plastic, and here's why. These tarps are UV treated to withstand the harsh rays of the sun, and they're non-woven, which means that they trap in heat and moisture, which is exactly what you want. The tarps I buy are 105 feet long and 24 feet wide. I cut them in half to create garden plots that are just over 50 feet long. This keeps all my garden beds uniform at 50 feet. Now, the size of your garden isn't what's important. What really matters is that all of your garden beds are the same size. That could be 50 feet, 100 feet, or whatever works for you in your context. But here's a tip. I wouldn't recommend buying a tarp any larger than that. They're extremely large, heavy, and hard to move, even when they're cut in half. But why does the bed size matter so much? In a moment, I'll explain exactly why this simple detail can make or break your garden's success. Now, these tarps are most effective in the heat of summer, but I've even started gardens using this method in the middle of the winter. If you want to speed things up, methods like flame weeding before you tarp can help too. But here's the real secret to making this work, and it's a part that most people overlook. It has to be wet under the tarp. Set up some sprinklers, run them for an hour before you tarp the plot. This creates a steamy environment that breaks down plant material fast. Plus, it tricks weed seeds into germinating only to suffocate because there's no sunlight, no oxygen, and they're under extreme heat. If it's too dry under the tarp, you'll pull it back months later thinking the job is done, only to find stubborn weeds waiting to take over. Now, how long should you tarp? I highly recommend tarping for up to a year for the best result. But if you're in a hurry, you can get decent results with as little as 90 days in the heat of the summer. If you want to speed everything up even more, use greenhouse plastic instead of a silage tarp. In the middle of summer, you can get results in as little as 30 days. But if you can, I still recommend tarping for about a year. Trust me, you'll thank me later. Once you pull the tarp back, don't make the mistake of thinking the job's done. If you see weeds like Bermuda grass, don't ignore them. The tarp won't always kill them completely. I'll go in and dig those weeds out that the tarp didn't kill, roots and all. Otherwise, all that hard work will be wasted. Step 2 is planting the cover crop. I broadcast the seed directly on top of the soil. When I first started, I used winter rye, which is a great choice if you're just starting out, but there's a couple key things you need to know to get it right. First, timing is everything. Winter rye must be planted by mid-October in my climate. And here's the catch. You won't be able to plant anything in those beds until May of the following year. Why? Because winter rye can't be terminated easily until late April or early May. You have to wait for it to form a seed head. But here's the critical part. You need to terminate it before it forms viable seed. This is called the milk stage because if you squeeze the seed head, you'll likely see a milky substance inside. This means the plant is at the end of its life cycle and ready to die. But if you wait too long and it drops seeds, you'll be fighting winter rye seeds forever. And trust me, you don't want that headache. If you want something a little bit easier to manage, peas and oats are a great option. If planted by mid-September, they can winter kill naturally. No termination required. But this timing is key for the winter kill. If it's not fully mature by the time winter hit, it will not winter kill, and you'll have to terminate it using other methods in the spring. We'll dive into termination methods in a moment, but over time I've learned that diversity in cover crops is where the real magic happens. Now, I use 13 species cover crop mixes inoculated with mycorrhizae and nitrogen-fixing bacteria to create the most biodiversity possible. The challenge with multi-species cover crop mixes is that they all mature at different rates. So if you don't manage them properly, some will drop seeds and become weeds. It took me years of trial and error to get this right. Once I've chosen my cover crop, I simply broadcast the seed right on top of the soil. I like to time this right before a good rain or even during a rain. I heavily overseed using nearly a 50-pound bag of seed on a plot that's only about 1/8 of an acre. That's enough seed to cover a full acre if drilled. Why so much? Because when you broadcast seeds, some won't germinate, some will get eaten by birds and rodents, and some will wash away by the rain. Plus, I want it as dense as possible to block out sunlight, smother weeds, and add maximum organic matter and nitrogen to the soil. If needed, I set up sprinklers to ensure good germination and healthy establishment. Then, I just let time do the work. As the cover crop grows, their roots scavenge for nutrients deep in the soil, pulling them to the soil surface. They attract diverse microorganisms, each playing a role in the soil ecosystem, creating a symbiotic relationship with plant roots and fostering mycorrhizal fungi connections. This helps plants uptake nutrients and water more efficiently, making your garden more resilient. It's like building a living support system underground. Once the cover crop reaches maturity, it's time to terminate it. I use a simple tool, a T-post tied to a rope, to crimp the cover crop down. Tied to a rope, and I'm just going to take it up. I'm going to go like this. I'm just going to step on it, and I'm just going to keep moving all the way down and crimp the whole thing right down to the ground. And I'm going to start on like the edges. I'm going to go down the edge and crimp it in, and then I'll go down this edge and crimp it in, and I'm going to leave the sprinklers in place and crimp the whole thing going in one direction. So I'm going to go down one way, and then I'm going to walk back, and then I'm going to go back down and crimp it, and then I'm going to walk back, and then I'm going to crimp it back, so it's all facing one direction, so that this way when we pull the tarps over, we pull the tarps over it all in one direction and it doesn't get snagged on anything. But here's a tip. Always crimp it in the same direction. That'll make the next step a whole lot easier. After crimping, I pull the tarp back over the plot for 2 to 3 weeks. This ensures everything is terminated and all the weeds that are trying to come back are smothered out. But before I tarp again, it's super important to run the irrigation to create that steamy effect just like we did earlier. This helps break down the cover crop material into a nutrient-rich sheet mulch, and it will force any weed seeds to germinate under the tarp, which guarantees a weed-free start. After a few weeks, we pull the tarp back to reveal a beautiful sheet mulch with the roots still attached, fostering a thriving soil ecosystem. But before we plant our cash crops, there's a couple more critical steps. So to recap, we've prepped our garden plot by tarping and eliminating weeds, planted a dense cover crop to build soil health and let time do the heavy lifting. Then we crimped the cover crop, tarped it again to create a nutrient-rich sheet mulch, and now we've got a living, thriving soil ecosystem ready for the next step. Now that we have our sheet mulch with our roots still attached, it's time to measure and build the garden bed. Before we start building out the garden beds, I want to quickly tell you about something that's been a total game changer for my farm finances. I actually get paid to grow cover crops through USDA grant, and my secret weapon for securing those funds is FarmRaise. They help farmers manage bookkeeping for their Schedule F, keep track of farm finances, and most importantly, they alert you to USDA funding opportunities and help guide you through the process. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by farm grants or didn't even know where to start, FarmRaise makes it simple, and if you need extra help, they can even connect you with experienced grant writers. Right now, you can get 20% off FarmRaise with my code CHEFM20. Don't wait, you could be missing out on free money that's sitting there waiting for you right now. I make all my garden beds exactly the same size, 30 inches wide, 50 feet long with 18-inch walkways. This isn't just about aesthetics, it's about efficiency. I keep every single bed the same size at both of my farms. Why? Because it makes everything 100% interchangeable. My drip lines, insect nets, silage tarps, shade cloths, and frost blankets are all exactly the same size. No guessing, no hunting around for the right piece. I can just grab whatever I need and it fits perfectly every time. No wasted time looking for the right piece. Now, the exact size of your garden beds isn't what's important. What matters is that they're all the same size. Once you realize how much time this saves, you'll never go back. To mark the beds, I use simple wood stakes from the construction aisle at Home Depot or Lowe's. Then I grab a yardstick, measure out my beds and walkways, and for perfectly straight lines, I tie tomato twine from one stake to another, outlining the garden beds and walkways like a grid. This might seem like an extra step, but straight, uniform beds make every part of farming easier, from planting to harvesting to irrigation. And let's face it, the real reason y'all watch my videos is because the garden looks clean, organized, and aesthetically pleasing. Once the beds are marked, I fill them with about 6 inches of fresh manure-based compost. Here's the thing, not all compost is created equal. You've got to do the research, ask questions, do trials before adding large amounts of compost to your garden. Some compost has little and no nutritional value, and worse, it can be contaminated with herbicides or pathogens. One of my guys delivered 20 yards of compost, and so I'm going to show you how I'm going to test it for persistent herbicide potential. So I'm gonna fill a few of these up with compost. I'm gonna take it home with me. All right, so I'm back in my grow room. I got my little things of compost here, and then I've got sugar peas, and then I've got some beans too. So I've just got the little pots that I filled up over there, and then my compost. 1, 2, hook them down into the compost a little bit. And then I'm going to go water them in. And if they grow all good, we're good to go. And if not, then we'll be concerned. But I've never had it happen that it wasn't good. I just I'm sharing best practices with you. And then so this is just like a heat mat and a grow light right up there. And then we'll check back in a few days and see what they look like. All right, y'all. So I'm back in the grow room here. It's a few weeks later. This is what you want it to look like. And if they like grew kind of distorted are like wonky, kind of like misshaped leaves, crinkly, or like just stunted and really didn't grow well at all, then you would be concerned. So this is the best test that you can do to test your compost for herbicide contamination. I'm looking all good, so we're gonna go and use this compost, or actually we already did. This compost feeds the soil and acts as a nutrient-rich mulch, keeping my garden beds practically weed-free all season. Yes, it's a lot of work to get to this point, but the payoff, never weeding or fertilizing your garden, is priceless. The compost adds biological diversity to the soil ecosystem, feeding the beneficial microbes and creating a thriving environment underground. This method feeds your soil, boosts plant health, and keeps weeds in check all season long. And there's no need to worry about erosion because your soil is anchored in by the cover crop's root system, holding everything in place. The dead plant material sits on top of the soil, acting as a natural protective barrier. On top of that, it's covered with a thick layer of compost, shielding it from the harsh effects of the sun, wind, and rain. It's a living system designed to mimic the forest, just like we talked about earlier, using nature as the model. Nature's been growing plants for millions of years without cardboard, synthetic fertilizers, or human intervention. Now for the walkways, I usually put down wood chips right away to suppress weeds and retain moisture, but in this particular plot, we left the cover crop residue as the walkway for the summer, because we direct seeded winter squash here. Why? Because winter squash vines out and covers the ground, choking out any weeds that might try to come back. There was no need to walk in the rows, no extra maintenance, and as you can see, we had a great yield of winter squash without adding any additional fertilizer. After harvesting the squash, we tarped the plot again to suppress any leftover weeds, added more compost, and filled the walkways with wood chips. Now it's ready for garlic and soon no-dig potatoes. If this blew your mind or if you've got questions, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear what you're thinking and what works in your garden. Thanks for watching, Gromies. Remember to always work with nature, not against it, and I'll see you in the next one.